Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me this morning are analysts, Democrat Betsy Sweet and Republican Garrett Mason. Good morning to you both.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Let's dive in. A dramatic start to the legislative session with a bomb threat evacuating lawmakers and members of the public from the State House this week. Turns out it was tied to threats made at Capitol buildings all across the country. But the head of Capitol Police in Augusta says it's the result of an uncertain time.
Sort of the environment is a bit different. In government buildings across the country, we've seen a lot of activity just in the last week or two.
Betsy, what does this say about our current political environment?
You know, I think the polarization and the normalization of violence as a way to solve problems, as a way to disagree with one another, is escalating really quickly. And I think the lack of respect for politicians, which is, back in the day, it was like, oh, now it's not that. We don't seem to have that. And I think that combination is going to make it riskier and harder, both for people to engage in the process, but also for people to run and to be involved in our democracy. And it's a sad moment.
Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, it's awful. I served in the legislature for 8 years. I've been up there for 14. I know Betsy's been up there for a long time too. I don't ever remember a bomb threat.
40 years.
And that's, as serving as majority leader, I'd never experienced that. So, to see that happen at the State House was very sad. And, I think there's a misnomer. People don't understand that, these people, these men and women up in the State House, they are average, everyday Mainers, every single one of them. And, in fact, my father serves up there. So, it's, a lot of family members, people, Maine's one big small town, and these are your neighbors. And like Betsy said, I think we're losing some of the civility, and it's really sad, and thankful for Capitol Police for catching it.
Yeah, and speaking of partisanship, there are a number of key issues up for debate this session that many of them are partisan. So I basically want to I want you to tell me if you expect progress or no progress on the following topics. And I want to start first with gun laws. Betsy.
Oh, definitely progress. I mean, I think that the shooting changed everything. And so I think we will see progress. I don't know exactly where or how or what that's going to give, but I think we will see progress.
Garrett?
I think it depends on who you ask. I think, Betsy's version of progress might be different than mine. But I think there will be movement on those issues, for sure.
All right, Child Protective Services, Betsy.
Oh, definitely movement and progress.
Absolutely has to be movement.
All right, and homelessness and housing.
Oh, we definitely need progress. I mean, it is a crisis across this state, across the country, but across the state, what's happening here in Portland and everywhere, absolutely.
But do you expect progress, Garrett?
I do. I think it's not just Portland and Lewiston and Bangor anymore. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So both the cost for housing and people who are unhoused.
And we have money. I mean, there's more money than they thought. So it's incumbent upon them to do something that's going to keep people warm.
And finally, the budget. Garrett?
Progress is a fun topic. I guarantee you that it will all be spent. That's what I promise. Yeah.
We agree. I agree.
I don't know if that's progress or not.
Well, yeah, no, and I hope so, because actually the rainy day fund where we put savings is full. They're not allowed to put any more money in there. We've put so much money in there, which to me is a tragedy given the needs that we have for homelessness and all kinds of things. But yeah.
Well, others might say it should go back to the taxpayers, but
that will be.
That's true, and I think that'll be part of the conversation. But that $100 million will not be all there when it's over.
All right, now to the city of Portland, where councilors unanimously passed a resolution this week calling for a ceasefire and the release of hostages in Gaza. It was sponsored by City Councilor Pius Ali. Councilors heard over an hour of testimony. A letter will now be sent to Maine's top lawmakers as well as the White House. Garrett, other cities and towns have done this, but it seems largely symbolic.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I do not agree with the position itself. But, when I watched a lot of the arguments and heard what the councilors were saying and why they support all of this, I have a very different opinion. But I will say this, one of the councilors, I cannot remember who it was, said that this is really about the historical record. And it's about where did Portland stand? And when you look back 50 years, 100 years from now, where do they stand? And I do think that the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice. I do not think that calling for a ceasefire right now is headed in that direction. I think that this is premature and probably on the wrong side of where they should be.
Betsy.
I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I think it's really important the resolution didn't just call for a ceasefire. It called for the release of the hostages and it called for increased humanitarian aid. So it was a very rounded thing to say, we are watching war crimes and genocide happening in that region. It has to stop. It's a call for peace. And my goodness, we must do it.
All right, now to some national politics in the 2024 presidential race. Former President Donald Trump under even more fire. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee revealing this week Trump's businesses reportedly received at least $7.8 million in payments from foreign governments as president. A ranking member of that committee saying that's likely only a small fraction of the real amount. Trump's campaign has not commented. Betsy, is there a there?
Oh, definitely there's a there. The question is all the there's that seem to have no impact. I mean, foreign government money is unprecedented. Him staying involved in his businesses is pretty unprecedented for a president. There are just just the pile of things that we wouldn't, years ago, decades ago, would never deem acceptable from a president is now just matter of course. And so it's the question is, is there a tipping point at any point? But no, there is definitely a there, and you should not be able to profit. And of course we know the influence of money in politics, and whether it goes in this pocket or that pocket, it's all the same.
Garrett.
I obviously hold a different opinion. I mean, most of that money came from stays in Trump hotels. One specific example was a 20-year lease that started in 2008 from a Chinese company in Trump Tower, long before the president was in office. So I would disagree, and I would say at the same time, you have Democrats saying that Donald Trump profited from foreign governments while he was in office. I would point to President Biden. I think there's a lot going on with him and his family. And, when foreign governments were renting hotel rooms at Trump Tower, I don't know what other foreign nationals were getting from the Biden family when they were paying and giving 10% to the big guy. So I think it's a lot of nothingness, to be honest.
Joe Biden is not Hunter Biden.
But the big guy is.
All right, meantime, Trump is pushing back on the momentum Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley has had recently, launching his first ads comparing her to President Biden. But Haley herself made a little flub on the campaign trail in New Hampshire this week, saying Granite State voters will correct Iowa voters. Take a listen.
Iowa starts it. You know that you correct it. You know that you continue to go.
It's a slap in the face to Iowans to say that they somehow need to be corrected.
Garrett, already her challengers like Ron DeSantis, they are going after Haley for this. Is this going to hurt her?
Yeah, this is one of those moments. I remember back in 2008, I believe, or 12, when Rick Perry was running, he was the favorite. He was winning by 30 points. And then he got asked a question, which 3 departments would you eliminate from the federal government? And he couldn't remember. And he'd been talking about it for months. This is kind of one of those moments, and you can see it in her face. When she said it, she turned around, she paused. And it's not a great moment for her. She's doing well in New Hampshire, but I mean, the bottom line is Donald Trump's ahead, 6 races Sunday.
And I think they're jumping on it big time because she is gaining momentum. And I think if something happens and something breaks and that tipping point is reached and we need somebody besides Donald Trump to be on the ballot, I think she's looking more and more like a front runner. And so they're just going to go after it. And it was an unfortunate thing, sort of like saying, I forgot that the Civil War was about slavery, but there's kind of things are kind of stacking up. But if they're going to look for somebody besides Trump, she's moving.
We have a lot more to get to, but we're going to leave it there and take a quick break. The Weekend Morning Report is back right after this. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me again are analysts, Democrat Betsy Sweet and Republican Garrett Mason. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
I want to start with my one-on-one interview with Secretary of State Bellows here on Political Brew as Maine continues to be in the national spotlight. Bellows made a ruling last week to block former President Donald Trump from the state's primary ballot in March. He has already appealed to the state Superior Court, and there are growing calls to impeach Bellows and even threats against her and her staff. Secretary of State Bellows, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
I know in the past week you faced a lot of threats, a lot of serious concerns. How are you doing?
It's been unprecedented, and honestly, it's been hard sometimes. But it's truly. Let me tell you a little bit about it. I expected criticism or pushback. I expected even anger, and I expected potentially to be targeted politically. But what happened starting last Friday, the stream of abusive, aggressive, threatening communications targeting not only me, but people who worked for me and members of my family.
You're facing a lot of pushback, including from Democrats who say that this decision should be up to the voters, not to you as an individual.
I think it's really important for voters and for Mainers to understand the process. So under Article 1 of the Constitution, the elections are administered at the state level. Every state is different. That's why you see different ballots in different states. In New Hampshire, President Joe Biden won't be on the New Hampshire ballot, for example. There are like over a dozen Democratic candidates and over a dozen Republican candidates. But in Maine, we have a different process. And I was required by Maine election law, and I think that's a really important point, that the Secretary of State under Maine election law is required to ensure qualifications are met. And there's this process for the voters in this challenge process to require the Secretary to hold a hearing and have their due process rights heard as well.
And this is likely to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, we know the makeup of that court is very conservative right now. So once it gets there, they may rule in Trump's favor, and this would all be for naught?
I think what's most important here is the Constitution and the rule of law. We as a nation are great because of our processes, because of our laws. So people who may disagree with my decision, Mr. Trump, for example, can appeal to the courts, and that is the process, and I will follow the law. People who disagree with the authority delegated to the Secretary of State can change the law. But let's talk about the practical consequences for a minute, and I'm glad you mentioned the U.S. Supreme Court. So I suspended the effect of my decision pending appeal to Superior Court. Now, the Superior Court is required under the law to make a decision by January 17th. The deadline for military and overseas ballots is actually under federal law. Every overseas and military voter is eligible to receive their ballot on January 20th. In discussions with our seasoned election officials and looking at Maine's election law, I support suspending the effect of my decision through the entire appeals process to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the practical effect of that, because keep in mind, the Superior Court has until January 17th, the Maine Supreme Court has 14 days after that, but Maine can't place a deadline on the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to act. So certainly that decision could come too close to March 5th, which is our presidential primary.
So his name could be on the ballot.
So in fact, the effect of my decision, of suspending my decision, is that his name has not been removed from the ballot.
But I think a lot of voters are saying, why go through all of this if his name's going to be there anyway?
Because of the Constitution. Because the Constitution is the foundation of our country. And I am required by law to review the qualifications of every candidate.
Right. Secretary Bellows, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now I want to bring in our analysts, Betsy and Garrett. Initial reactions, Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Secretary of State does have a unique role in Maine politics. She's mentioned many times on national talk shows that, this is an unprecedented decision, that no Secretary of State has thrown somebody off a primary ballot before. And that is true, but it's also because Maine's law is very different than other states' law. So yes, I would say that the Secretary did what she was supposed to do under the law. However, do I think it was the right decision? Absolutely not. I think, Donald Trump is the front runner by far. The Constitution is ambiguous at best at what a insurrection is, which is what the Secretary has cited in her opinion. And so I don't think it was a good decision. I think it's going to lead, and unfortunately has led to a lot of out-of-state threats, in-state threats, and I condemn that wholeheartedly. The Secretary should be able to live in peace with her family. However, unprecedented decisions like this tend to evoke strong responses, and what the Secretary essentially did was she threw the leading candidate for president off the ballot on the Republican side.
Betsy, do you believe this was not a political decision?
No, I think the attorneys looked at it and said, what can we do? And really felt like she had no choice. Aiding and abetting an insurrection is part of what the problem is. And, you can wonder whether we call it an insurrection or not, but if it looks like a duck and talks like a duck, what happened on January 6th was also unprecedented. And so what's happened since then is also unprecedented. And in our law and the court and the arguments that the lawyers made in the administrative hearing were very strong. And I think that I don't think she had a lot of leeway to say, oh, well, your arguments don't count. That's not true. They do.
Was this really a damned if she did, damned if she didn't scenario, Garrett?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know what? When you're in politics, like I have been and like Betsy has been, you get put in those decisions. That's what you're paid and what you're elected to do. And so, yeah, it was a difficult decision for her. I would note that she stayed her own decision. So, I think if I were in that situation,
essentially,
yeah, I mean that towards the end, that's what it says. But like, I think we're going to get an answer for all 50 states very soon. I don't think the Supreme Court has much of an option than to say something about this, or you're going to get a patchwork of ballot work.
And the question will be if it's in time for Election Day.
Yes.
All right, moving to the start of the legislative session in Augusta, guns are top of mind in the wake of the Lewiston shootings. Hundreds of people turning out to the State House this week on both sides of the issue, with proposals for everything from strengthening background checks, an assault weapons ban, to mental health alerts, many including the father of one of the Lewiston victims, Arthur Bernard, calling on lawmakers to do something now.
That we can save lives. We just have to be willing to meet halfway.
Now, Betsy, I know you have been working on this effort for some time, but speeches and demonstrations aside, are you hopeful that anything can actually be done here?
I am hopeful because I think what happened was a fundamental shift. In all my decades of doing this, people have said, "Oh, Betsy, it'll never happen here. Stop." Well, we don't have that argument anymore, and very tragically. And so I think people are saying, "Whoa, what happened?" Even people, many people, gun owners, NRA members are saying, "Whoa, wait a minute. There are loopholes. There are ways this should never have happened." And it's not just mental health. Mental health, yes, we need help with that as well, but it's both end. And so I think we're going to see movement on both the gun safety situation and what we can do better, and also on the mental health services.
Garrett, where can middle ground be found?
I think one of the things that Betsy just said is absolutely right. I think mental health. I think if you ask most Republicans, they would say to you they have been fighting for certain pieces of mental health. I think that. True. Oh, I disagree. We can talk about 21 and 29 wait lists. We can talk about a lot of things that Republicans have championed. But I think that is some place that Republicans would absolutely sit down and talk. Like, how can we get better services to people? That I think there's definitely something there.
But on the issue of guns specifically, where can there be common ground between?
I think when you talked about in the last session when they passed the yellow flag law, I think a lot of right-leaning groups like SAM and others sat down and talked through yellow flag law. If there needs to be conversation around that again, I think Republicans will sit down and talk about it.
And I think one thing that's going to change is now people are going to look at data. So we all have opinions, right? But now we're going to look at data. And we know that the biggest use of guns in Maine is suicide. So a 72-hour waiting period, there's data that will dramatically reduce that. So I think we have to take the heartbreak that we have and have it fuel us really taking a serious look at the data and let the data drive what makes a difference. And I think people are ready to do that more than ever before.
Finally this week, and make it quick, winners, losers. Garrett, we'll start with you.
Oh, mine's going to be a little kitschy this week, but it's real life. I think the winners are Maine parents. School started just a couple days ago, and the losers are Maine kids. But I think everybody won. I think most people had a great holiday season. And
Betsy.
The winners are the over 1,500 people who came to the State House and stood in cold lines for hours to get in to make their voice heard and say we need to do something about gun safety. And the losers to me are the people who are doing all the violent threats and using violence and threats against family and extended people, against Shenna and others when there's a political disagreement.
That does it for this week's Political Brew. Betsy, Garrett, thanks so much. Don't forget, Meet the Press this morning at 9. The Morning Report is back right after this.